The lights dimmed in Carnegie Hall, casting a golden sheen over the polished Steinway grand that sat center stage. The crowd murmured with anticipation. Tonight was not just any recital, it was a masterclass led by Victor Alden, the critically acclaimed pianist whose hands had graced every major stage in the world. Whispers of excitement bounced off the ornate ceilings as he took the stage with a confidence only years of applause could forge. Then, in the hush before Victor's opening remarks, a voice came from the back. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the auditorium like a tuning fork. "Excuse me. May I play something?" Heads turned. At the side entrance stood a man in dark glasses, his cane tapping softly against the marble floor. Elijah Johnson, a local street performer known only to the few who passed by the Lexington Avenue subway station. Blind since birth, dressed in second-hand clothes and humility, Elijah stood awkwardly, but with surprising calm. Victor squinted toward him, then chuckled dry theatrical. "Is this some kind of audition? This isn't America's Got Talent, my friend." Laughter erupted from parts of the audience. A few took out their phones, sensing viral gold. Victor turned back toward the piano, dismissing the interruption. Elijah, undeterred, bowed his head and began to walk away. But then a woman in the balcony stood up and said just 6 words, "Let him try." "What do we lose?" Silence fell. One by one, phones stopped recording. Victor sighed theatrically, then nodded toward the staff. 5 minutes, he muttered. "Let's make it quick." Elijah never saw the stars, but he knew the sound of their silence. Born blind in the outskirts of Atlanta, he was raised by his grandmother, Miss Thelma, a retired seamstress who sang spirituals instead of reading bedtime stories. Their home was modest wooden floors that creaked like whispers, wind chimes instead of clocks, and an old upright piano that hadn't been tuned in decades. But Elijah didn't need perfect pitch. He needed purpose, and he found it in every sound that wrapped around him. At 5, he could mimic entire church hymns after hearing them once. At 7, he was harmonizing with crickets outside his window. By the time he was 10, people said he could hear light. He had no formal training. No sheet music. Just a man named Curtis, an old jazz musician who used to play at smoky bars until arthritis claimed his wrists. Curtis saw something in Elijah, something he remembered seeing in himself before the world taught him to be silent. Curtis taught him not how to play music, but how to feel it. The piano ain't just keys, boy. It's a mirror. Play what you see inside. Elijah listened. Listened to the sound of broken sidewalks of arguments, through apartment walls of babies laughing next door. He turned them into melodies. He played for strangers in the streets. Most never stopped, but the few who did, they never forgot the song. Victor Alden was once the very thing he now mocked, raw, untrained, desperate to be heard. Born in Boston to a family that barely made rent, he was discovered playing on an abandoned piano in a school basement. His gift was undeniable, technical, flawless, explosive. But when he was rejected by a famous conservatory professor who called him all talent, no discipline, something inside him shifted. He vowed never to be underestimated again. Over time, Victor built his name into a fortress, his performances precise, his reputation untouchable. He became the voice of elite classical music, giving masterclasses, judging competitions, and shaping the next generation of musicians. But in that climb, he traded feeling for form, soul for symmetry. He began to believe the lie that had once hurt him most, that talent must be refined to be respected. So when Elijah appeared blind, untrained, uninvited, Victor didn't see possibility. He saw disrespect. He saw chaos entering the cathedral of his craft. "He's not a musician," Victor said, backstage still fuming. "He's a street act with delusions." His assistant paused, unsure how to respond. "Sir, he's something. The audience is listening differently now." Victor scoffed. "Let them be dazzled by novelty. It'll pass." But as the curtain prepared to rise again, Victor hadn't realized it wasn't Elijah who was untrained. It was him trained too long to hear only what he expected. Curtis stood just off stage, his old jazzman's frame, now slightly hunched, but his voice steady as stone. When Victor made another sarcastic remark under his breath, Curtis stepped forward, not with confrontation, but conviction. "Give him 5 minutes," Curtis said. "Not out of pity, out of respect for what music used to mean to you." Victor stared, then gave a dry smirk. "Fine. 5 minutes of failure teaches more than 5 years of pity." He signaled the crew. "Clear the stage. This'll be quick." The grand piano was centered once more, bathed in a lone spotlight. The rest of the hall darkened like the opening of a play no one believed in. Murmurs ran like static through the crowd. Some were curious, others annoyed. Most were waiting for a train wreck. Then came the sound of a cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. Elijah entered, not with drama, but with purpose. Curtis guided him to the bench, not by hand, but by voice. 3 steps forward, now left. "You'll feel the edge." Elijah obeyed like someone finding home through memory. He sat down, fingertips brushing the keys with reverence, like reading Braille made of music. He paused, not for effect, but to listen, to feel the room breathing, to let the silence speak before he did. And then, without warning, without introduction, he began. The first note didn't scream or dazzle. It sighed, low, rich, and full of weight. A single chord that resonated like a door creaking open to a world no one had seen before. Then came the melody, not a song from any known composer, but something raw and original. It was the sound of childhood dreams wrapped in rain, of southern porch nights, of subway tunnels echoing ghosts. It was jazz, blues, classical, and gospel woven not like a patchwork, but like one continuous breath. Elijah didn't play to impress. He played to remember, to heal. His fingers moved like they'd been born on the keys, shaping silence into truth. Each phrase climbed higher, sorrow laced with resilience, hardship held by grace. You could hear the loneliness of a boy who never saw the sky, and the quiet joy of someone who still believed in dawn. The audience, once restless, fell into stunned reverence. Phones were lowered, eyelids blurred with tears. Even the stagehands in the wings stopped what they were doing, breath caught in their throats. Victor sat rigid in his seat, at first unmoved, then confused, then unsettled. Because somewhere in that sound, something cracked inside him, a memory maybe, a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in years. And when Elijah reached the final note, he didn't end with a dramatic flourish. He simply let the final chord fade, barely pressing the pedal, allowing the vibration to linger like a whispered goodbye. The hall remained silent. No applause, no rustling, just a stunned, aching stillness, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. The final note dissolved into the silence like smoke slipping through a crack in the world. For a moment, it was as if no one remembered how to breathe. The audience didn't clap, couldn't. Applause would have felt wrong, almost insulting, like speaking during a prayer. Instead, they stood, one by one, slowly, reverently. Not with roaring praise, but with the kind of hush reserved for memorials or miracles. A standing silence. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others simply wept without knowing why. In the front row, a young girl no older than 10 raised her hands in the air, not to cheer, but to sign something. "Thank you." Her parents whispered to her, asking how she knew. She just pointed at Elijah and said, "He heard me. I know he did." Backstage journalists who had been ready to film a scandal were now frozen, cameras lowered, unsure if they were witnessing history or something holier. No headline could capture what had just happened. No lens could frame it. Victor remained seated. He hadn't moved since the first chord. His fingers, once tools of perfection, now trembled like they'd forgotten their craft. His jaw tightened, as if trying to hold in something heavy and unnameable. Finally, he broke the stillness, not with a shout, but a whisper, low and shaky. "Who taught you?" Elijah turned toward the voice, though he couldn't see its source, and with a quiet smile he answered, "Pain. And the streets. They teach you, if you listen." The house lights rose slowly, but the room remained hushed, as if afraid any sound would wake them from a dream they didn't want to end. Someone in the back, a teenager anonymous unnoticed, had filmed the entire performance. No filter, no title, just raw, uncut footage. That night they uploaded it with a simple caption, "The day a blind man showed us what music really is." By morning it had reached 1 million views. By noon the world had stopped scrolling. It swept through social media like a tide shared by jazz musicians in Chicago, choir directors in Seoul, and classical composers in Vienna. The clip was played on every morning show, dissected by critics, reposted by celebrities. But none of them could find the right words. Because Elijah hadn't just played a song, he had rewritten the very definition of music. In conservatories from Juilliard to Havana, professors paused lectures to show the performance to their students. Some wept, some sat in stunned silence. Others wrote new compositions that very day. A hashtag emerged. Music without sight. Not as a gimmick, but as a revolution. For the first time in decades, elite music institutions began inviting street performers, blind musicians, and self-taught artists to speak, to teach, to share. Because now everyone understood technique might fill the halls. But truth fills the soul. Meanwhile, interview requests poured in for Elijah from morning shows, from TED Talks, even from the White House. But every request met the same quiet refusal. Curtis, speaking for him, simply said, "Elijah believes the song wasn't his. He was just the vessel, and vessels don't talk, they carry." He returned to the subway stations, not out of defiance, but because for him that was always the real stage, where sound wasn't polished or paid for, it was lived, and the world, for once, listened. Victor Alden sat alone in his penthouse that overlooked the pulsing lights of Manhattan, but the city had never felt quieter. The walls were lined with awards plaques, first edition scores, yet none of it offered comfort now. He replayed Elijah's performance again, this time without trying to analyze it, just listening. For the first time in years, he admitted to himself he hadn't heard music like that in decades, maybe ever. Unable to sleep, Victor made a rare call, one that bypassed agents and assistants. Curtis picked up after the second ring. "You coming to gloat?" he asked flatly. "No," Victor replied. "I'm coming to listen." The next evening, Victor stood outside a modest apartment in Harlem. The hallway smelled of jazz and old floor polish. Curtis let him in without a word and poured them both tea. The walls were lined with sheet music, most handwritten, some yellow with time. They talked, for hours, about how sound doesn't belong to institutions, about ego and how it creeps into art disguised as standards, about the fear of irrelevance that comes with age and success. Victor finally voiced the question that had haunted him since the concert. What if? What if everything I built was just a cage? What if my fame was built on fences, keeping people like Elijah out so I could stay in? Curtis looked him in the eye, a slow smile creeping through his beard. Then it's time to tear them down, one note at a time. By sunrise, Victor had made his decision. He wouldn't just applaud from afar, he would act. He extended an offer not to Elijah, who would have likely declined, but to Curtis to help find and mentor young, unseen talents across the city. To walk the alleys, listen to the sidewalks, and give stage to the sounds no one hears. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't penance. It was the start of understanding. 3 months later, a new banner hung outside Lincoln Center, where velvet ropes and black tie elitism once ruled. No eyes needed. A concert for the unseen and unheard. It was unlike any program the venue had ever hosted. No sponsorship logos, no star billing, just one promise: real music played by real people, regardless of what they could or couldn't see, hear, or afford. Curtis opened the show with a short welcome. He didn't talk about struggle. He talked about sound, how it finds a way into every crack of a broken world. Then the stage darkened. When the spotlight returned, Elijah stood not behind the piano, but in front of it, conductor's baton in hand, a blind man leading an orchestra of musicians who had never fit in, a girl with Down syndrome on violin, a deaf percussionist who played by vibration, a wheelchair-bound cellist whose tone could make mountains kneel. Victor stepped onto the stage for the final piece. He sat beside a 10-year-old girl who was born profoundly deaf. Together they played a duet, her sensing rhythm through a footpad speaker, him following her lead with delicate trust. The final chord rang out, not thunderous, not flamboyant, just full. The hall stood again, silent, hands pressed to hearts. Critics called it the most important concert of the decade, not because it broke technical records, but because it broke something deeper, the illusion that greatness lives behind gates. From that night on, No Eyes Needed became more than a concert. It became a movement. Schools changed curriculum. Orchestras re-evaluated auditions. Music, real music, began returning to where it belonged in the hearts of everyone who ever had something to say, but no place to say it. And somewhere backstage, Elijah sat quietly, tapping his cane to the rhythm of the crowd's silent awe. He wasn't the star. He was the spark. Years passed, but the echo of that night never faded. Elijah Johnson, still refusing to sign autographs or grant interviews, quietly launched a foundation called The Sound Within. Its mission wasn't flashy. It aimed to provide adapted instruments to children with disabilities. Braille-engraved pianos, guitars with tactile tuners, drum kits for children with limited mobility, and above all, access to spaces where these children could feel heard before they ever played a single note. Curtis Gray, now but sharp as ever, retired from teaching full-time. But he didn't disappear. Instead, he began visiting schools not to talk about scales or music theory, but about Elijah. He spoke of the boy who turned silence into a symphony. He didn't bring handouts, just stories. And in every classroom, 1 or 2 students leaned forward a little more, recognizing a piece of themselves in Elijah's journey. Victor Alden did something no one expected. He stepped away from the spotlight. In the quiet, he wrote a memoir. Its title stopped readers cold when I heard for the first time. The book became an unexpected bestseller, not for its technical discussion of piano performance, but for its brutal honesty. He wrote about gatekeeping, about fear disguised as authority, and about how a blind man taught him to see. And through it all, Elijah kept declining honors. When offered honorary degrees, he said, "Give them to someone who's still searching." When asked to headline festivals, he replied, "I'm not the story, the sound is." So when a city planned to honor him with a statue, he made one request: "Don't carve me." Instead, they unveiled a life-size sculpture of a grand piano. Its keys were etched with braille, each one engraved with the word "Feel." No name, no plaque, just a bench, and beneath it the inscription, "If you ever lose the light, listen." And in music conservatories around the world, something began to shift. Alongside performance technique and music theory, schools began adding a new class, emotional intelligence, in artistry. Because students were learning what Elijah had always known: sound is not made with fingers, it's made with heart. It was the Royal Opera House in London. The invitation had been extended countless times over the years, but Elijah had always said no. Until one day he agreed on one condition: no introduction, no biography, no name. The staff was confused, the press frustrated, but they honored his request. The programs were left blank. The only thing printed was the word "listen." When the lights dimmed that night, there was no fanfare, no curtain rise, just darkness. And then a single spotlight falling on a lone piano at center stage. Elijah walked slowly, cane tapping against the floor like a metronome. He found his place with practiced grace, and then, for the final time, he placed his fingers on the keys. He played the same piece he once performed in Carnegie Hall, the one that changed everything. But now there was something new. A single added note, a subtle change in tempo, a resolution that wrapped the entire melody in closure, as if saying, "The journey is complete." And when the last note lingered, no one moved. The audience sat still, thousands of people in silence. Not from uncertainty, from reverence. Then from the balcony came a soft hum. A child no older than 5 repeated the melody, not perfectly, but with feeling. Elijah rose, bowed once, and exited the stage through the back, his cane tapping softly in rhythm. Not for applause, not for glory, just in time. The screen fades to black. A closing voiceover begins, not narrated but felt. Some performances seek applause, but this one asked you to remember. We cut to Victor in the audience. His eyes are closed, hands clasped in his lap. He is not mourning. He is not celebrating. He is simply listening, finally, fully. Outside, a boy sits on a street corner with a toy keyboard. He plays a version of Elijah's melody, slightly off-key, full of wonder. People pass, some stopping, some not, but the boy plays on. The camera pans up to the sky. Then the final frame. When you cannot see the world, sometimes you hear it more clearly. No credits roll, no soundtrack follows, just silence. Then faintly, the sound of a piano, distant and imperfect, but real. If this story moved you the way it moved us, don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that greatness doesn't come from sight sound or applause, but from truth. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more stories that challenge what we believe and celebrate the voices we too often overlook. And if you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or underestimated, know this: your story matters. Your voice matters. Keep showing up. We're listening.